You are now in the Backcourt, a Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. I am your co-host, Lucas Kaplan of NetsDaily, Nets Film Focus. We continue to pump out great videos for you guys. And joining me back from a 1-week hiatus is Sarah Kustok of Yes Network and many other things. Sarah, how are we doing?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back with you, Lucas. I really appreciate Ryan Rucco for filling in last week. I think he now just wants to come back every week, but I told him he needs to pace himself.
Yes, no.
We can only have so much of him.
He aced his debut. I will say you have some I don't want to
Good.
say big shoes to fill, but
No, I probably do. I probably do. He's the best of the best. So I'm happy that you enjoyed him as much as I enjoyed him, and I hope our listeners and viewers did as well.
No, it was great. And hey, Yes Network, always a cheerful broadcast, no matter who's on, but especially you and Ryan. And I was in Boston, and we recorded the day after last week, which was another close game. So in the week since we've recorded, the Nets have played 2 games against the Pacers and one last night, returning home against the Dallas Mavericks. Obviously, it's been 2 weeks since you've been on, so of course, feel free to touch on whatever has stood out to you in this busy time of year. A lot of hoops, college hoops, Nets hoops. But we were just talking off air, and last night was one of the first times in a while that Brooklyn kind of just didn't have the juice from the start. They lost to the Mavericks 120 to 101. And I think it goes to show you it says a lot about their season that, they kind of don't have it, and it feels very surprising. It feels like we don't see this often. So just from being in the building last night, kind of an immediate recap, what did you see from Nets Mavs on Monday night?
Yeah, and I think to your point, Lucas, it's a credit to what this team has done throughout the entirety of the season. You could look at the record where it stands now at 23 and 49, and their play, their performance, if you didn't see anything and you just watched games, would not indicate that being the case. Prior to last night, their prior 10 games had been 9 points or less, 10
Yeah.
straight games. So um, if that doesn't tell you exactly how they've played, the effort they've put in, just how resilient they've been throughout the course of the season. And I say all that to say that Dallas game it just wasn't their night. Felt that way from the start. It was a Mavericks team that no doubt got a big boost with Anthony Davis returning to the lineup. I think when you look at the injury of Anthony Davis, the direction of the Mavericks season, obviously that's a whole nother layered story of where they were at. But I think there was a lot of questions if AD would even return at all this season. So I think that as well under our friend Jason Kidd had been a team that's similar to what we say about the Nets of regardless of lineup, playing really hard, fighting through a lot of things, still in contention for a play-in position at this point, currently sitting in 11th. You could tell that they felt that juice of having their star player back, the compliments of how they were playing, and then added on the fact of the Nets. I think we assumed that players and through the course of the season and your professionals to get paid to do things like there was a mental and emotional toll that takes place when very challenging losses add up. And I think you look at those two Pacers games, being in Indianapolis for 3 plus 4 days, the overtime loss, the very tight loss, just everything that went into those. I do think that can be a heavy burden and a challenge when all of those close games continue to turn out in ways that the outcome is not as you desire. So I say that to say it looked that way, missing shots, step slow on defense, some of those 50-50 balls. And it wasn't just, I mean, I think you can look down the stat sheet, and there were some really solid games and solid efforts from a lot of players. Cam Johnson, I think, ended up with a
Right.
career high in assists. Just different players adding certain moments. There was a little bit of a push, but it was a first game in a long time that I can remember that it felt like, regardless of the combinations, the lineups, who was in and out, Dallas was definitely more locked in with more of a sense of purpose, more of a sense of urgency. And I think that happens. That always happens throughout the course of a season. And I think we're just not accustomed to it because this Nets team has shown up with such a level of fight and professionalism each and every night out.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about the Dallas game first to kind of not just because it happened last night, but to get it out of the way because it definitely is the anomaly. And I think talking about the rest of the Nets week and, the week before that, since you weren't here last time, is, we can talk about greater themes and things we saw consistently. But I agree with Dallas. They just didn't have it. I think I also want to give credit to Dallas for a really coherent offensive game plan to me. We know the Nets like to pressure the ball. We know they like to trap hedge screens. And Klay Thompson, ex-Net Spencer Dinwiddie, got the ball out of their hands quickly. And Dallas, with that front court of Kai Jones and AD, haven't played together, but you put those two on the court, it's a lot of power and finishing ability at the rim. And they got the ball from the perimeter to the free throw line area, 4-on-3s, attacked quickly. AD wasn't super active last night getting his legs back under him, but he had 4 quick points to open the game. I thought that set the tone. And again, it says a lot about the Nets that type of night where they just don't have it is really rare. Here's a fun stat. They lead the NBA in clutch games since the All-Star break. They've played 12 of them. And so within 5 points, 5 minutes or less, these games have been tight. These games have been really sweaty in a lot of cases, not easy on the heart. And Brooklyn has, come up short quite a few times. And I think we're going to really talk about that in this episode. The 2 losses to Indiana were different but similar. The first night in Indiana, they're up 5 with a minute to go and a couple mistakes, a couple empty possessions later. They're in overtime, can't pull it out in overtime. The next game in Indiana, they're fighting back from a 20-point deficit in the fourth quarter. They get, within a possession, but can't quite finish it out. And the games felt different, but the ending was the same. And so I want to ask, I at least struggle to make, not make sense of it, but is it luck? Is it just, clutch time comes back around? The Nets had a lot of clutch wins earlier. Is there a consistent theme in some of their losses? Like, are they not doing one specific thing down the stretch? So I wanted to get your take on why this young team, why the Nets have had some struggles in closing out clutch games, because their record over the past month could easily be, and perhaps even should be, maybe a lot better.
I think there's a handful of things that you can point to, and I don't think there's one clear answer on that. I will say I was fortunate enough to Ian Eagle and we were not
Right.
always together, but we were able to watch. We were both in Raleigh for the first and second rounds of the men's NCAA tournament, and in watching those games at Indiana, and sometimes it's different, and I appreciate this when I'm getting a chance to watch the game as opposed to sitting there calling the game because there's
Hmm.
certain nuances that you pick up. I think it's important to remember with this team, like we talk about young players, or we talk about building, we talk about a foundation. That is they have exceeded in such a way, even from the start of the season, that I think we had this expectation. I think they have this expectation for themselves. Jordy Fernandez, the fact that he's a quote unquote a first year head coach in the NBA and has not seemed like that one single bit. And yes, he has experience in so many different stops. And being a head coach with the Canadian national team and just so much of his assistant coaching experience, but even so many of these players, like there's an aspect of when a down the stretch of a game when a foul occurs that you think, okay, maybe you can't foul a 3-point shooter on this possession. There's some of that is a young team and just not being in those circumstances
Hmm.
tend to kind of rear themselves. And I think that's why, to me, there's so much optimism to be had for the fact that there is this many opportunities for all of these players to be in these type of games. the coaching staff to understand, and it's not just for their experience, but understanding, the players, the trust in their players, who understands certain instances and what cases. You can go through things in practice as much as you want, but I think in the early part of the season, there was a level of you have a Dennis Schroeder often, you have a Dorian Finney-Smith, you have different players who have seen so much throughout the course of the league who have been in those circumstances. And I think now you're seeing some players experiencing things that you don't necessarily have that veteran presence. I think that's so often why we point to Cam Johnson, because he's played in the biggest moments on the biggest stages, and
Hmm.
you cannot overlook that, whether it's playing in the finals, whether it's, all the postseason experience. But he too now is in a very different role, and his
Right.
responsibilities and what he's asked. And I think every one of these players, everyone has just been bumped up a notch. So that's a very long-winded way of saying that I don't think it's pointing to one thing. And I think also other teams, sometimes there's a different level of what teams are competing for at this point of the season. And I think right now, where the Nets sit, what Indiana needs, what certain wins needs, sometimes, that's where that comes into play down this final stretch of the foundation you're building, and what does it mean, and how you're able to register success and what success means. And I think for Brooklyn, what their success looks like, and I think we talked about this at the early part of the season, wins and losses is not gonna be the indicator of a successful season,
Hmm.
and a win or a loss isn't necessarily gonna be an indicator of a successful night,
Yeah.
because just because the Nets come away with a win in a certain instance doesn't mean that they played, performed, learned things that may not help them down the line. And so that's where I think this has just been a really, really rough stretch. And I think in many instances, throughout the course of the NBA, you need to remember, I think it's easy to point to, oh, they blew this lead, or, you had this lead and you lost. That happens all the time in the NBA. And it's not always the fault of the team who the lead is lost. I think in many cases too, you got to look at the other side of it and an opponent coming back. And I think in many cases we've seen the Nets come back and put themselves in position to win a game. They just have not closed it out.
There are a few good points I think you made there, especially I like what you said about Cam Johnson. He's played in the FIBA World Cup, he's played in the NBA Finals, he's played in a lot of playoff games, and yet when you are the guy initiating offense, it is just it's a different experience. He's not standing in the corner waiting for the ball to be swung his way. That is a similar experience whether you're in the first quarter or the fourth quarter. You got to knock down an open shot, but when he's en route to a career high assists at night against Dallas, and then they switch up the coverages against him in the third quarter and he turns it over a few times, that's a brand new experience for him. Maybe not in that game, but overall this season. And I think part of his improvement is that he's been able to get those, see those challenges. Tyrese Martin, Keon Johnson, they're handling the ball. They're navigating a defense with the ball in their hands. So even with the, limited experience they have playing in close games, there's more on their plate now. And in that first game against Indiana, Keon Johnson fouls Benedict Mathurin, 14 seconds left, up three. He makes three free throws. Nets challenge that call. They win the challenge. It doesn't change what has happened for them in the previous 47 and a half minutes, whether or not the guys got 1% better, whether or not Jordy Fernandez saw, the individual improvements he wants to see. So I think that is where what you're saying comes into play. This season can't be measured in wins and losses. Keon Johnson's having a career year, and we break it down on Nets Film Focus. He's seen two defenders. He's quick to the paint, slow once he gets there, drive and kick game, making finishes at the rim. None of that changes whether or not the referees overturn that foul call. And so it's been a rough stretch, as you said, but it's also been a very revealing and in some ways successful stretch. And it's nice to see the guys get rewarded with wins, but I think it's okay and it doesn't, really dampen what Brooklyn's mission is right now, that they haven't been rewarded with wins. Um, One thing I wanted to ask, do you think that it is harder for a young team to get stops in clutch time? Like, do you think the bleeding is easier to stop not the bleeding, but, improvements on defense in clutch time, or, offensive possessions, making shots in clutch time, if you had to pick?
I think for this young team,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think they have confidence in making and shot making
Mm-hmm.
down the stretch in a clutch situations. That's what's impressed me so much about really individually going down the line of these players. Why, which you love to see. And I don't think it's as natural, and you shouldn't be as assumptive about this about every individual NBA player is, but
Right.
they have hit critical shot. I mean, Cam Johnson, Nick Claxton, Keon Johnson, Jalen Wilson, Zaire Will, like, I'm gonna name everyone, throughout the course of the
Yeah.
season, and I think that his, this, like, burgeoning belief of, like, "Oh, yeah, if I get an opportunity, we're gonna make a shot for one another," and even there's been some instances that they've come back, and I'm thinking of D'Angelo Russell and obviously
Mm-hmm.
him playing a part of that, but I think they have confidence in that. One, it's about, and that's where the factor of what other defenses are doing. So, are you creating the best quality look? Are you getting the ball to the guy that you want in
Right.
his hands? It's not that you don't trust everyone, but are you executing something in a way that you're creating the best quality look? And I think these guys, and again, credit Jordy Fernandez for doing this. I think they don't live and die by a shot going in or out. They know if we ran things, if we execute it right, if I made an unselfish pass and play, and if it doesn't go in, doesn't go in. But did we create the best look or a great look for ourselves? And that is the evaluator. And I think they really truly believe that. And that gives you a little more freedom and confidence as a shooter because you're not so much focused on the in or out. And I think you see that. I think defensively, there have been stretches, and back to your point of when they've won those games and won those close games, a lot of it, I remember talking about it being defense and getting stops on
Mm-hmm.
defense. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a trigger point of when we've seen wins or losses, and whether it's a foul that you wish you could have back, or just a miscommunication, or being a step slow, or just up against some of the greatest players in the world that are going to
Yeah.
make shots down the stretch. Some teams, I'm thinking about a Cleveland game, down the stretch. This is a team that has been cooking and has been in so many of these scenarios, and they've got closers and they know how to make those shots. But I think in many cases it becomes more of a challenge defensively, and then that can sometimes lend yourself to how you feeling, on the offensive end, or vice versa. But I think what's impressed me with this group is that they seem to have the confidence and belief that they're going to be able to close out those games. And what you don't want is now this stretch of now having lost 7 of the last 8 games, or 14 the last 16. You don't want that to creep in your head. But I don't, it doesn't feel that way. And it's easy to
Mm-hmm.
say. This team still believes in one another, believes in
Yeah.
each other, cares about getting better, cares about the respect they have for the game, of putting out their best effort. And I think that's why there's been so many close games.
To sort of wrap up this point, this ties into why there have been so many close games. I really liked this Jordy Fernandez quote from pregame against Dallas. He says, there's so many things you can do. And when we lost the game in overtime the other day, it came down to one possession because the game went to overtime and we had control the whole game. And a lot of times, I think we all think about that last possession. It was, in this case, Keon fouling a shooter that might be kicking his leg. They called a foul on us. But is that the possession? I don't think so. We could have been one possession better in the first quarter, the second, the third. So you don't know what the possession is. Yes, the experience to go through the fourth quarter is always important to execute under pressure, but we also had control to do one more possession throughout the game. And I really like that quote, and I think it's indicative of Jordy's mindset of getting 1% better. Sure, Keon fouling a shooter or a couple empty possessions in overtime seem to stand out as the possession that might have swung the game, but it very just as easily could have been better execution in the first, second, or third. And, I think that's a window into this team this year. There are really no reps off. There's really no meaningless basketball. And I think that's why you've seen a ton of guys, Zaire Williams, Keon Johnson, Tyrese Martin, Cam Johnson, Tosan Uwoma, Maxwell Lewis, all have career years. Um, and despite there being quite a few losses lately, I think that's going to continue. I wanted to circle back, just two quick guys, any thoughts on, since it's been 2 weeks, since you've been on, we haven't got a chance to talk about the breakout of Maxwell Lewis. What have you seen from him? Who he's just pouring in career best performances night after night in his sophomore year, his first with the Nets.
I'm just impressed. One, you look at him and his frame, his athleticism, the nature of how he's built. He's wiry, he's long, he's quick, he's explosive. How much ground he covers, and everything on both ends of the floor. I've just been really impressed with his patience in
Mm-hmm.
when he gets to his spots in the mid range, for example. What it looks like him, taking 3-point shots, decision making at certain moments in transition, and just the upside of what he could bring to the table, I think even more so on the defensive end when he continues to acclimate himself to not only Jordy Fernandez's system, but just the game and, just getting used to where he needs to be and tendencies of other players. But he's been tremendous. And I also think, like, we've seen this and they've talked about it. Players have just oozed with excitement and pride and happiness for just him getting this opportunity and what it means because of the person that he is in the locker room and off the floor and the teammate that he is, the just joy that he brings each and every day when it's, some of these moments now that I think that's when groups need it more than ever. So I'm excited. It's great to see. And those, like, these are the people, the players, the opportunities that you love that he's getting this chance to really have a good amount of run to showcase some of these things and play through some of his mistakes.
Yeah, and the thing that really stands out is how happy his teammates are for him. And he fractured a tibia in his first game with Brooklyn. Looks like, he could be out for the season. Oh, you don't want to speculate, but it was just such a tough moment earlier in Toronto. Comes back after 2 months and playing the most significant NBA minutes of his career, and his teammates so joyous for him. And Jordy called that the most important thing. So that's been great to see. And to your point, I really do like that he simultaneously tries to fit in the system, it seems, and thinks about where his rotations are and what shots he has to take. And has talked about, I need to be a catch and shoot guy. I like to put the ball on the floor, but sometimes that gets me in trouble. But at the same time, I love these role players that you just notice on the floor. Like I
Yes.
tweeted this, he makes 8 or 9, let's say he has a 10-minute stint. He's making a play a minute that you have to notice, good or bad. Maybe he's over aggressive, but maybe he's getting a deflection. Maybe he's taking the ball to the rim in transition. I love, and I think it's a good sign for maybe role players, guys that don't handle the ball as much, to really force their way into the fabric of a game. The other guy I wanted to ask about real quick before we do Brooklyn's finest, Ryan and I talked about this last week, but since you've been on, it's been a while now. Cam Thomas has been ruled out for the season with a hamstring injury. We talked a lot about, his season in review. It is the end of his rookie contract with the Nets, so we reflected a bit on his 4 years in the league so far as a whole. You don't have to go too deep on it, but I guess your reaction and your takeaways from Cam Thomas in year 4.
Well, first of all, your heart breaks for him. You know how
Right.
badly he wants to be on the floor. The significant amount of time he missed through the course of this season finally gets himself back. And again, it's wild to think when we've watched him, it's like he has not missed a step. Like every time that, he had missed a significant amount of time, he comes back on the floor and he's the Cam Thomas that we know. So the fact that he was only able to play in 25 games this season, that you never want to see. But I think the jumps and the improvements in his game were evident regardless of the sample size of how many games. In particular, the last game, again, unfortunate in what had happened at the end of the Chicago game, but his ability to knife through the defense, assist and facilitate in the ways that he now has and has had always, but so much gravity on the floor and his balance of his own shot making, calling his own number, creating for teammates, and not just making passes, but truly getting a guy open for an easy basket. I think to me that was the big jump because it's one thing to run an offense or run sets, run
Right.
actions and get off the ball. It's another thing to I know how to get this guy the basket.
Yeah.
That's where I think and that's where I think, like, to me, that's a huge difference in the fun part. We were talking about Cam Johnson, the growth he's made. He's getting guys buckets. He's not
Yeah.
just passing within the course and you end up getting assists because you're running a set. He's creating things because of the gravity. Cam Thomas started to do that, and he's a bucket. Like, he just truly, if you need a basket, you know you can go to him. And I also think too, just his engagement on the defensive side, the work that he had put in there, all of those things I think were all extremely positive to continue to watch and to see. And just unfortunate that we now can't see more of it in these final few weeks. But for him, all you want is for him to get healthy.
Played only 25 games this season, but I think as much as any other net, exemplified the 1% better every day mantra that Jordy Fernandez preaches. That's a great sign. It lets you know that he's doing all the right things behind the scenes, even when he has a ton of injury rehab to do on top of that. And the passing flashes have always been there. He drives, gets deep into the paint, and hits, the dunker spot or a dump off pass for a layup from one of the bigs. But as to your point this season, I think we saw more of, okay, I'm going to get to this spot and pass up a shot that I could take to get another guy an easier look. So I think that was a really important and fun improvement to see from him. I am going to transition to another former LSU Tiger for my Brooklyn's finest. I love a good Trendon Watford week because when he gets going, it's fun, it's weird, it's funky. I like that the Nets have sort of this wildcat offense off the bench, and I don't say that as a slight. First subs of the game, 6 minutes in the first quarter, whatever it is. Trendon, go to the block. We're going to run some off-ball action. You can find a three-point shooter, but if they don't double you, if they don't help, you're posting this guy into the basket and you're finishing. And I think it's been really tough for defenses to deal with Trendon Watford as this change of pace. Something about it just tickles my fancy when a bench unit has like its own identity and they come in and they're different and they mess stuff up. And I like to see Trendon Watford lead that charge. So that's why I would give Trendon my Brooklyn's Finest award for the week. Obviously, not just the way he plays, but the fact that in Indiana, he had two really strong games, 26-point night. He also, had a 15-point night, got ejected in one of the games.
Yeah.
That's fine. I'm sure he's not happy with the fine, but
No.
hey, I am not one to criticize that. It was fun to watch, I guess. Don't encourage, any extracurriculars, but not going to condemn them either. What did you see from Trendon this week?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think I think his ability to be unpredictable when he's in a way so that he's making reads, it keeps the defense on their toes and it's so hard to figure out. And that's you talk about being fun to watch him.
Mm-hmm.
It's he continues to grow into that lane of I think about last season when he came and just being uber aggressive getting downhill and how we turn the corner and and that was such an important aspect of putting pressure on the rim for this group and he still does that. But now you can load him up on the block with his back to the basket and fan everyone out on the weak side and then allow him to either operate in posting up or finding teammates. How he's run the offense, knocking down 3-point shots, just the versatility defensively. Like I think all of those things. And I understand that it was impactful in the game when he got ejected. However, I think
Right.
that type of juice is something that you want and you need in certain games just to continue to keep that amount of engagement. And so he's another player, and again, we can go down the list with so many of these guys, but he's another player to me that has taken it upon himself to understand points of growth and just continues to expand upon areas that he's already strong at and do so in a refined way. And it's been a whole lot of fun to watch that jump that he keeps making. And I think there's so much more room, even more so, to grow.
The thing I loved about his performances in Indiana is we've been talking about assist to turnovers and like if you're going to handle the ball this much, you got to spray it around to guys. And it feels like it's come full circle because Indiana, very famously tries not to give up a lot of threes. They they give up the 5th fewest threes in the league per cleaning the glass. So they don't bring a lot of help. And Trendon Watford was like, all right, I've been having career high assist games, handling the ball in the past, but if you're not going to double me on the block, if Andrew Nemhard and Ben Shepherd, two guys that I like but are a little slight of frame,
Yeah.
are going to guard me one-on-one, then I'm getting to the rim. And it wasn't selfish or whatever. It was just reading the game. So he is my pick for Brooklyn's finest. And Jordi Fernandez talked about the next Nets he wants to see over these last 10 games for Brooklyn. And he said he wants to get a look at, a lot of guys, new guys in different positions out there. So I don't even think we need to go there this week, because we're just going to see over these last 10 games, Jordi Fernandez, who he wants to see, guys that might stand out, Maxwell Lewis, and, who knows. But in that vein, trivia this week is very simple. It's not a very complicated question, but it might have a surprising answer. I don't know. Sarah, who do you think leads the Nets in total minutes this year?
Ooh.
We have to play the Jeopardy music.
Well, I'm
if it's
trying to
not
think.
copyrighted.
No, I'm trying to think. I mean, my natural instinct would be Cam Johnson.
You're so close. He's in second, but you're very close.
And then I guess I don't know. No, no, Trendon missed so much time. When you said easy, I was
Yeah.
thinking, not Trendon, not Nick, Zaire.
No. I'll give you one more guess. Similar position.
Cam or Zaire?
I guess both.
Not Jalen Wilson.
It is Jalen Wilson. Jalen Wilson has only missed one game this year.
I was almost going to guess that, because I was like, Jalen's always available, and he's
always
played a solid amount of minutes, and he's played in like every game.
He has played in like every game. I wanted to just find a way to give him a shout out, because I was just looking at their basketball reference page. He's only missed one game. He's leading the team in minutes.
Man, that was going to be my second
Yeah.
guess after Cam. I wish I would have just went with my gut.
Shouldn't have overthought
I was thinking
it.
of guys that had spent more time starting.
Over the last 2 weeks, he's had a couple nice 3-point shooting games, including the that second game in Indiana. He got the start, hit 3 threes. So simple little trivia there. Maybe not easy, but a simple straightforward question. And shout out to Jalen Wilson. Sarah, is there anything you'd like to sign off with here?
No, we got 10 games remaining, and I can't believe that we're already here, but I'm excited to see how it all finishes. And it really has, again, you put the record aside, this has been such a fun team to watch and to track and to follow, a lot of these individual players, but also collectively how they played as a team. And it's not because we cover them, and it's not because, we see them every night. That really, I've spent a lot of years covering the NBA and basketball, and seen a lot of iterations of different groups. And I know this one has changed through the course of the year. But I'm impressed by them, both professionally and personally in so many ways. And so I'm excited for these final few weeks.
And all you need to do to confirm that is talk to people around the league who say the same thing. I mentioned this last week, but I was randomly in the hallways below TD Garden and saw a lot of Celtics personnel give a lot of compliments to Nets staff, Nets players that they saw. Just guys play hard. It's fun to watch. And that's coming from a reigning champion. And I think it's very true. And it's made this season fun to watch, as Sarah said, and it's made it fun to podcast about. It's made it fun to release these episodes. And as always, thank you guys for listening to them. This has been episode 22, of the Backcourt, Brooklyn Nets podcast presented by Ticketmaster. We thank them. We obviously thank you guys for listening. Like and rate and subscribe. Give us positive feedback or, negative feedback if that's honestly what you think. But for some reason, I doubt that. We have a great positive community of Nets fans per usual listening to this pod. And on that note, we will see you guys next week.